So let's start with Tucker Carlson. He is obviously one of the loudest voices in the conversation across the nation, particularly as it pertains to COVID-19. He had a segment on Wednesday night that went one step further than he normally goes, pointing out that he believes, according to some information that he found, that the vaccine is actually potentially dangerous. Let's take a listen in.
So the question is, how do those numbers compare to the apparent death rate from the coronavirus vaccines now being distributed across the country? That's worth knowing. So we checked today, and here's the answer. And these numbers come from the same set of government numbers that we just read to you from. Here they are. Between late December of 2020 and last month, a total of 3,362 people apparently died after getting the COVID vaccine in the United States. 3,362. That's an average of roughly 30 people every day. So what does that add up to? By the way, that reporting period ended on April 23, and we don't have numbers past that, not quite up to date. But we can assume that another 360 people at that rate have died in the 12 days since. So you put it all together, and that is a total of 3,722 deaths. That's almost 4,000 people who died after getting the COVID vaccines. The actual number is almost certainly higher than that, perhaps vastly higher than that. The data we just cited come from the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, VAERS. VAERS is managed by the CDC and the FDA.
Now, Tucker just inserted perhaps the most dangerous anti-vaccination message possible, that you could potentially take the vaccine and die, but he inserted it into the mainstream conversation. This message literally parrots a Facebook post from February 9th that used the same source, VAERS, to say that, quote, death reports in federal database show the fatal risk of COVID-19 vaccine, which was shown to be false by PolitiFact. Now, he inserted that conversation almost as an appeal to authority, saying that particularly, and that's what makes it particularly nefarious, because it gives the millions of people who listen to him every night, it gives them the belief that the numbers that he is sharing is actually scientific data versus just self-reporting. It is not scientific data. But the lie is so big and has reached so many people because Tucker Carlson, it is so big that Twitter.com had to post at the top of their page today this information, fact-checking the VAERS information. And this is what it said, quote, the VAERS system are open to anyone and are intended to provide an early warning for any previously unknown effects of COVID-19 vaccines, according to PolitiFact and FullFact. Adverse effects and deaths reported on these systems are not necessarily caused by COVID-19 vaccines and may be unrelated coincidences, according to the CDC. But that didn't stop Tucker Carlson from saying that this information is from the CDC, making his audience of millions believe that the problem is actually documented scientific fact from the CDC. Now, this fact checking was regarding the anti-vax Facebook post posted by some random Facebook user that went viral. And now Tucker Carlson is essentially inserting a Facebook post logic into the national conversation to his 3.4 million listeners every night. I want us to take a listen to this rebuttal that was originally prepared for that Facebook post that went viral, but completely is applicable to Tucker Carlson's rant.
What about those social media posts claiming to be based on federal data and reporting? Well, on a case-by-case basis, it's problematic with a capital P. Reports are copied from a national vaccine safety surveillance program set up by the CDC and the FDA. This database records health issues that arise after vaccinations as adverse events. You may be thinking, yeah, I would say that death is an adverse event. Of course it is. But this system accepts and records any and all reports of adverse events, and it comes with can't miss caveats. Reports may contain information that is incomplete, inaccurate, coincidental, or unverifiable. Without further study, vaccine experts say it's almost impossible to tell whether a particular adverse event is linked to a vaccine or would have happened anyway.
Now, as clear as that video was, so far it's only been seen by about 4,000 people. How many people listen to Tucker Carlson on each night? Quote, in the first quarter of 2021, Carlson averaged 3.4 million viewers. 3.4 million viewers heard Tucker say this on Wednesday night. But he literally just did this in the most insidious way, in a way that is so detrimental to us getting past this pandemic. I want us to take a listen to this next clip of Tucker as he goes a little bit further.
So what is the real number of people who apparently have been killed or injured by the vaccines? Well, we don't know that number. Nobody does, and we're not going to speculate about it on this show.
But he literally just speculated and inserted into the minds of all of his viewers who are already skeptical about the vaccine because of the politicization that has taken place over the last year, particularly because of Donald Trump and Fox News. He inserted that into the national conversation, but he didn't stop there.
But it's clear that what is happening now, for whatever reason, is not even close to normal. It's not even close to what we see in previous years with previous vaccines.
And there you have it. Tucker Carlson is being paid millions of dollars every single year to ensure that we never reach herd immunity. Because according to the New York Times and so many other posts, it is very unlikely with the level of people who are hesitant about the vaccination that we will reach herd immunity anytime soon. Cenk, I'm still amazed that Fox News and Tucker can get away with this because what they're saying is actually going to lead to even more people dying.
Yeah, I call conservatives dumb probably more than anybody in America. I'm fairly unabashed about it, and my job is to report the news. And so when they say something dumb, I say it's dumb. In this case, Tucker Carlson's a really smart guy, and it's unfortunate, but he is. And so it's not that he doesn't know the information that we're sharing with you. That makes him more dangerous because he is choosing to go this uber populist route, and he knows the effects of his speech. So he's allowed to have that speech, but he's on a dangerous path here. And so let me just break it down a little bit. So look, when they say it could be a coincidence, it sounds like, oh, come on, oh yeah, I guess it's a coincidence. They take the vaccine and then they die right afterwards. No. I don't think they're stating it right. Like, I need you to understand what the reality of it is. Okay, so first of all, the reports are totally unverified. And in fact, there are now reports that right-wingers are going in there and faking stuff, like the things that didn't happen. And they're saying, oh, after I took the vaccine, I died. Okay, I don't know if they're putting in the form of I, but so there's some of that going on. I don't know how much, but when they say unverified, it means they're not saying that they died because of the vaccine at all. They're dying of many different causes, most of which have nothing to do with the vaccine. But yes, they died after taking the vaccine. But also remember, who are the first people to get vaccinated? People above the age of 65, people with serious medical conditions. So a lot of them are dying from that, right? And even then, if you take everything in face value, every report is true, and even though this is impossible, they're saying, even if you believe that every death was directly because of the vaccine, you know what the number is, the percentage? 0.0017%. Well, that is like the other vaccines, even if that were if everything they were saying was true, because over 250 million people have been vaccinated in the country, have gotten 1 or 2 shots. So that's not the number of people to be accurate. That's the number of shots that have been given out, right? And so that's why it's a tiny percentage, but you would never get that sense if you watch Tucker's show. Tucker knows all this, but he makes it sound like 30 people a day are dying. People are dying from this, but he never quite says it. He says things like, apparently, right? We can speculate, right? And at different times, he even says here, quote, vaccines are not dangerous. That's not a guess. We know that pretty conclusively from the official numbers. But then he turns around saying that's other vaccines, but we don't know about this vaccine. So what is he doing? He's saying one thing for the lawyers, because he knows, look, Dominion sued them, and he knows this is very serious business and could create legal liability for Fox. So he's smart enough to put a couple of sentences in the report saying vaccines are not bad, so that he can go back in court and go, I said vaccines are not bad. Then he turns around and says they're killing people, apparently 30 people a day. If you take it, oh my God, watch out. Because that feeds the populist fear. That's a huge driver of conservatives, anger. And yes, some percentage of those people who listen to Tucker won't take the vaccine, and some percentage of those folks will get it, and some percentage of those folks will die. And Tucker's perfectly aware of that, but he thinks ratings are up.
So from my perspective, Ben, it reminds me of a quote that I have said on many occasions, and I believe I've probably said it on this network before, and that is, you cannot hustle controversy for profit because you are playing with voices that you cannot control. And at the end of the day, I think what Cenk has said about Tucker Carlson being a smart person is actually where this situation is deeply dangerous, because I tend to agree he's very smart. He understands his audience, he understands what he has to do. And to an extent, for me as a lawyer, when I listen to Tucker Carlson talk, I think about what it is to do a summation. Because when you're doing a summation, what you want to do is you want to present your opinion and your arguments to the jury almost as if they are fact. And so every now and again, but you can't make yourself the fact finder. You have to make it clear that you're making an argument. So every now and again, you'll say stuff like, I suggest, or I surmise, or, I charge, to make it clear that these are opinions that are coming from you, not facts that the jury is supposed to ingest or take as such. And judges will instruct them to do that. The judges will say, what you hear from the lawyers are not fact, it's argument. And you're not to take it as fact. You're supposed to take it as argument. If you're persuaded, that's fine, but these are not facts. The problem is, there's no judge sitting in front of the TV or in the corner at Fox News when Tucker Carlson goes on his rants, and the way that he sort of cleverly, and I'm using that word extremely loosely, interweaves these sort of numbers and this data. It's kind of like this confusion game where it sounds very official. It sounds very, very much so as though he is giving them hard and fast data and information, because he's giving them numbers and he's giving them statistics and all the above, when in reality, all he has done is taken an opinion and sort of loosely cherry picked what numbers he can make work in order to support his argument. All of these things are deeply dangerous. And the question for me is, where's the line, right? So we thought about what Fox News was able to do, and we thought that was terrible back in 2000 and 2004 with George W. Bush. We thought man, the Republican Party and conservative media has really taken the national discourse in a really bad direction, in a bad place. And we saw that after the rise of the Tea Party, and we thought, this is dangerous. And then we saw how that began to fester and continue to grow. And then that gave birth to all kinds of wacky, crazy stuff that we've seen since then that has been has its roots in conservative media. Everything from birthers to QAnon and everything else, we've seen that sort of fester and grow out. And the question becomes, again, where's the line where we start to say, you know what, this is going too far? We would have thought that perhaps January 6th would have been the line, that the Capitol insurrection would have been the line where folks say, you know what, we've been playing it really fast and loose around this notion of news and commentary, and there's only a matter of time before we get burned by it. But yet and still, we continue to see these half-truths, these propaganda that are meant to stoke fears, that are meant to sort of play to that base in a way that they may not necessarily be able to decipher properly, and it's getting increasingly dangerous. And as you've already said, it's going to result in people losing their lives. So my question is, where's the line, Tucker? Where does this stop? Because he is smart enough to know what he's doing and how it's going to affect the people who are listening to it.
There is no line. And could you repeat that quote that you said again? Because I think that is so powerful, that you can't play with controversy.
Controversy for profit, because you are playing with forces which you cannot control.
I think the line is the fact that as long as they keep getting more ratings, as long as there are more clicks on YouTube, as long as there's money to be made off the controversy, I think they forget or they are going to ignore the second half of your quote, because what we've seen is that line continuing to move. And I think what it's predicated, it's dependent upon us who understand that concept to make sure that the people who are elected and are in power, that they understand that concept. I want to ask Joe Biden if he understands that the conservative movement has no line. I need to know if Kamala Harris understands. I need Joe Manchin to decide where he stands on this, because you're right, January 6th should have been the culmination and for them to walk back and say, okay, let's get back to some normalcy. But they're pressing ahead even further with any controversy that they can hustle.
Yeah, and I think that piece of it, and to go back to Cenk's point about, calling conservative idiots, and I get that, and I understand that can be rather satisfying on the right day. The reality is, on a larger scale, stepping back from it, I think it's really important that progressives and people on the left and Democrats, and if you call yourself a liberal person, right, you have to understand that in this game, InfoWars and everything else, there is no moral high ground. That's not to say that you ignore the line to the opposite degree and you take things in the opposite direction. But I do think that as you look at like Schumer and Pelosi and Harris and Biden and all these other sort of figures, the idea that you want to sort of play things above board is not going to work when you're dealing with an opponent who has no rules and will go as far as they will go in media and the use of propaganda and the use of manipulation of narratives to do things that they know are misleading to the public, but ultimately give them some sort of competitive or strategic advantage. And I think that is a larger point that people on the left have to be willing to accept, that listen, this is a dirty game and it's dirty for real because people are not caring about truth. And so there is a very challenging space around how do you balance the notion of morality while still understanding that you have to be effective against an opponent that has no regard for any of the above. But at the end of the day, acting as though you can sit on your moral high horse and get points for doing things the right way when Tucker Carlson is doing this religiously is not going to move the needle.
Yeah, so again, last two quick things here. There's an ironic person who called out Tucker Carlson here, which is Fox News' medical expert. Nicole Safier, she did not mention Tucker by name, but right after his broadcast tweeted out that this was basically the wrong information. And she made an excellent point, which I'm surprised by. She said she is their top medical expert on Fox News. Anyway, she said, it's interesting that the people that said that the COVID deaths were inflated, they didn't believe the number of deaths, now all of a sudden say the number of deaths from the vaccine are underinflated. Notice, and the point there is, this is definitely political by the right wing, right? They're like, I don't believe science when it comes to the number of COVID cases and deaths. And now I'm turning around and saying, no. The number of, I'm so concerned and the number of vaccine deaths are higher. No, they're, for whatever insane populist reason, have decided that the Republican voter just loves conspiracies and fear. And so they're stoking that fear, but in this case about the vaccine, which leads me to the final point. Look, I get it. People are concerned that unvaccinated folks can spread it to other people. That's why we want as many people vaccinated as possible. But I'm vaccinated. Almost everybody I know is vaccinated. And my reading of the science is that it is very difficult for us to be seriously hurt if we're already vaccinated. If you have a different point of view, I love you. That's okay. Everybody go read actual doctors and actual scientists and make up your own mind, okay? But I think, and Tucker will not admit on air whether he's been vaccinated or not. And that's also interesting, right? But the bottom line is the people that are hurt the most are not the vaccinated people, they are the unvaccinated people. And that is Tucker's audience. And he knows that he's putting their life in danger. But if you think about the Republican ideology, what have they always done? Worked against their own voters' interest, kept their wages low, given tax cuts to the rich and to the corporations that are oftentimes crushing them, made sure that they can't get universal health care. And now they're taking it one step further. They're saying, well, our audience is such suckers, we can play with their own lives and they'll enjoy it. They'll like it and they'll watch me more if I endanger their lives more. That's an amazing phenomenon. So, and he's right, his ratings are up and a huge percentage of Republicans would rather have fear than health and well-being and even life. And that is a sad indictment of the way conservatives think. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.